Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the No Name Cinema Society. And hello, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts here in Los Angeles for, our final regular season show ever. And this is our freeform segment. Every set of episodes, we end with a freeform segment, sort of a catch-all, just random discussions, random segments. It's kind of a fun thing. This sort of will look back tonight not only on some of this set of episodes, a 53rd set of episodes, but also on the show in general. And with me for this evening, ladies and gentlemen, are a couple of fine young gentlemen. Well, actually, not that young. First, you saw him on our last episode, our classic movie discussion of E.T. The always funny Nate Shelkey is here with a cat. Is that Bert?
This is Bert the cat.
Hi, Bert the cat. We only see fur.
There he is.
Oh, look at that cute face. I wish we had a lower third for Bert. And let me introduce another society member who's been on the fourth most shows of all time. Ladies and gentlemen, the Jeopardy champion, Jim Carroll, is here.
Hi, thank you for having me back.
You're welcome. Jim, I had to tell you that my longtime cinematographer, JW, is here watching us live. In the apartment. He's waving from over there. Does us no good. But regardless, it's his last night here, so we are going to watch Homecoming this evening, starring you.
Well, I feel it was more co-star. I don't want to take anything away.
Jim plays the role of Sam, I believe is your character name. Is that right?
Yes, I believe that is right.
In my feature Homecoming, released in 2006, and Nate has seen it.
I have.
That's all he's going to say about that. All right, this has been our schedule for our 53rd series episodes. We had our Indie Spotlight, which turned out to be Davey's last show, with a review of Paolo Sorrentino's The Great Beauty, which Jim was a part of. This past Thursday, Devin, Nate, and I did a review of E.T. as part of our classic movie discussion. Of course, tonight is our sound off, and we got a full slate here. We better get started. And we should get started with the drinking. So Nate might be drinking with me tonight. He wasn't the other night. Nate, are you drinking?
I am. In fact, I have more of watermelon lemonade, which I had last week, but I also have uncorked some harder stuff in a mango wheat from Blue Moon.
Yeah, that looks fruity.
It's very fruity.
Okay.
I had a fresh mango yesterday, and honestly, it's one of the best things I've tasted in my life.
You've had a big week.
I was saying to my wife, if you've seen the Sex and the City movie, it's like when Charlotte doesn't want to, drink the water in Mexico, but then she has the fresh fruit, and it just is, there's like a sensual awakening, and that's what I had. And then I saw this and had to get it because I'm just mango madness is what's going on here.
Mango madness. I like the alliteration.
I don't like breaking rules, and and I really am a stickler for them. But for you tonight, I have a Pilsner Urquell.
Pilsner Urquell, that's so exciting! Jim's gonna drink it with us. We got a full house of drinkers. I think it's the first time ever in the show, maybe the second time. I'm gonna open the old Elysian Space Dust here. Where's the front of it? There we go. The Elysian Space Dust that I had one on during ET, I think.
Yeah, space beer.
All right, space beer it is. Well, cheers to you all. Here's to a good sound off.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I'm excited. All right, so let's get on with the show with our first segment here. This being the end of the No Name Cinema Society. In terms of our regular season, we will finish off with our finale episodes at the end of the year, but Davey's pulled the plug on the show in general. This is the end of a long run, 3.5 years. Pretty much it'll be 4 years after we finish the finale episodes. 53 set of episodes. I'm very proud of that. And we started out doing one long episode, like 2-hour episodes, which featured the current review, the Indie Spotlight, and the classic movie discussion. We had all those in one episode, and then by episode 11, we started to split them up. So it's been a big part of my life for the last 4 years, and these guys have joined us even less than a year. I'm grateful to you. It's going to be sad to let it go, but we wanted to look back a little bit and see, see some of the things that we've done here. We so far, including tonight, we've posted 282 videos with 3 more to go, the 3 finale episodes during Oscar week in 2019. We've got about 30,000 views total, led by our discussion of the Missouri Breaks, a random Western that we reviewed in episode 25.3, and that was, I think, around March 2016 that we did that review. The review that's coming up to catch it very quickly is another Western, strangely enough, our second best performing show, a review of another classic called Will Penny from 1967, starring Charlton Heston. That was episode 42.3, about to pass the Missouri Breaks for our best performing episode ever. Our classic episodes make up about 45% of our total views. The most successful indie spotlight we ever did was a film called Circumstance, episode 30.2, which is in 2016, I believe. Our most successful current feature was a film called Miss Sloane, directed by John Madden, and we did that in November 2016, episode 36.1, and Jim and I saw that film together in New York.
I was going to point that out.
Beat you to it. Way ahead of you. The biggest individual day that we had was at Will Penny getting a bunch of episodes randomly on November 5th, 2017. Our biggest month ever was this past March, after we released our 2017 finale episodes, led by our 1942 in review that Jim was a part of. That really led us to our biggest month ever out of these 4 years. And in terms of all the hats that I wear, in terms of really useless trivia tidbits, this particular Green Yankees hat is the hat that I've worn when we've had the most views. This hat has had the most views when you tabulate all the information. Nate, I know you are fascinated.
I am fascinated, and I'm sure Jim would appreciate this, that on ESPN there's a regular column called the Monday Morning Quarterback, which I enjoy, and he does a feature called Uni Watch, which he basically just talks about uniform developments in various sports, and I actually find it fascinating. As an example, like, who couldn't not love the old 80s Houston Astros?
A lot of people don't. I like them.
Yeah.
My favorite, I still love the powder blue Chargers.
Yeah, that's classic. If I were to get a Chargers jersey, that would be a sweet one to get.
Oh, shizzle. Now they're in LA, that might not be a dumb thing for you to get.
Yeah, that's true.
So I thought I'd have an extra top 5 here tonight, in the sense that I would count down my favorite 5 shows that we've done, ones that you might be able to look at. And I can do this very quickly because I don't have much to expound upon it. But number 5 is episode 44.1, and what I think is the best current feature discussion we had. And it was with Ryan and Davey, and it was a film called Murder in the Orient Express, directed by Kenneth Branagh. I think we did a great job on that particular one. I think it was last November 2017. We really got in depth about a movie I didn't think that we would. It's a remake, another adaptation of Agatha Christie's novel, but it was a really fascinating discussion, a lot of fun too. In terms of indies, comes from this year. My favorite indie was a fairly recent one, episode 48.2. We did a film called Afternoon Delight with me, Davey, and Patrick, getting into sexism and sex work and how it's viewed, and especially when we did the T word. We really got into that movie. It's a very interesting movie, but the discussion was fun and interesting. We laughed a lot, but we also explored a lot of the socio-political themes of the film, which is essentially a comedy. My favorite sound off comes from 2017, episode 40.4. I think it was in July of that year, it was basically a look back at our 1966 in review, in which we, caught up on a lot of topics that we didn't cover in our 1966 in review show, and all of us, J Money, Davey, and I, all did a top 5 films from 1966, because that was when Davey and J Money did participate in the year in review things. So we all looked back at our experience of looking at the 1966 films, and I feel better about that show than I do about the 1966 in review in general. And our best classic, I think, came from early last year, I think April 2017, in which we did David Lean's Brief Encounter. This is episode 39.3. All of it's like the films. It was J Money and David that was with me on that show, and they really got into it as well, and they had never seen the film before, and they discovered it, and we really talked about the nature of relationships, especially in the 40s, and how it relates to the World War that was going on in the area. We showed some fascinating clips. We talked about what Lean brings to the table as a director, and how he makes something so staid as Brief Encounter very cinematic. It was a really interesting episode that I enjoyed doing, and I think it really translates as to a really strong show. My number 1 is, I think, our coup de grace as far as the show has ever been involved, and Jim was involved with this one. The 1942 in review, I think, is the best thing we've ever done on the channel. It felt like everything I ever wanted the show to be. Our 1990 in review show was good, but it was looser. We hadn't really found our style yet. It was our first year in review, and it was a little stressful getting all the photos together and things like that. I hadn't really found the right rhythm for the show. The 1966 show was a disaster. I was very sick, and we were having technical problems all night long. It was a really rough evening, and it comes out in the show. But finally, for this 1942 in review show, we put it all together. I think it was informative, fun, thorough. I'm very proud of it and all the work Jim, George, and I put into it. Jim, I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
It is something that I wasn't tired of talking about when we got to the end. I wanted it to continue. And in fact, I've still gone back, and movies that I had not seen from that show, just from the discussions that we were having, I've gone back and watched some of those movies. Like, I still am trying to watch Major and the Minor, if I can find a downloadable option for that.
Well, that's the one to see. That was my number one.
I know.
In fact, Jim, even off air, you, me, and George have been emailing, more thoughts about the films of 1942. That's how fun it was. I think my point about the final show is the fun comes out, I think. It is clear how much fun we're having. I meant to find the email. You saw it. We got a beautiful email from a fan who told us like what the show meant to them and how they went out and saw Random Harvest as a result of our discussion. And it really meant a lot to me. And I forwarded it to you, Jim. I don't know if you remember that email.
I do. I mean, and again, in the emails, there were movies that I missed that, when you would ask, which did you like better, this movie or this movie? And I would go back and watch the movie that I hadn't seen just to have that opinion. And it's like I keep going back to that list to find new movies. And
I feel special connections to these years. And so this day in history, it tends to come up with things from 1942, 1990, 1966, because I feel like I was a part of that year going through that process.
Yeah. And I learned to love Ann Baxter. 2
classics ago, we did The Magnificent Ambersons as a show. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have not seen the show on it yet.
Fun little tidbit. Jim, you were the first person I asked to be on the 1942 in review. And no offense to George, but Nate was the second person I asked, and he told me where I could stick my films from 1942. It was daunting, wasn't it, Nate? That wasn't the idea?
It was. Although I was just curious, so I'm looking up Ann Baxter right now, and I feel like it must be like just some sort of promo, but it's funny because this one poster for one of her films says Satan in skirts, which is pretty funny.
That pretty much sums up Ann Baxter's career. Who you know her from as Eve from All About Eve, Nate.
Right.
But she was in The Magnificent Ambersons at the age of 19, which makes Jim kind of dirty by falling in love with a 19-year-old.
I think my point was that you're supposed to fall in love with her.
Yeah, no, I'm joking. Anyway, so I wanted to ask you guys, you've been on the show about a year now. Do you guys have any thoughts about the show and your experience with it, memories? Jim, you've actually watched some episodes. Nate, I don't know if you've watched any, but you've been on 5 or 6 at this point. Do you guys have thoughts and memories that you'd like to share?
Well, I guess I was curious from you. Do you enjoy watching old movies that you haven't discovered before, or do you enjoy revisiting more?
I particularly enjoyed discovering the ones that are good that I haven't seen. I think I enjoy discovering. And we have this segment coming up about called the Obscure Movie Discovery. And they're not always good, but it's interesting to pick up on smaller films that you weren't aware of. And one of these special years, the Obscure Movie Discovery is always from 42, 66, or 90. And it's really fun to go back even after looking at these years, and finding something that you hadn't seen or hadn't heard of or something like that. Yeah, I think I do enjoy that a little bit more.
What I've enjoyed is, that's always, like reading a book that you've read before. On your different readings, you always find something new. But I've enjoyed a lot when you watch a movie like that you feel like, oh, I should have watched, but for whatever reason you never did, and then you encounter how a classic scene or moment fits into a film,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you've seen clips from it, but you weren't able to get the context until
exactly. Yeah.
And you've mentioned that before, I think, at some of our screenings. That's what you enjoy about coming to the screenings.
It's fun because I think you just know these things are, either from award shows or just even from other movies, referenced, and you're like, oh, okay.
From the shows that you tape, do you have any specific memories or something that really struck you or something you learned?
Honestly, the show that we did last week was very poignant, and it was fun with Devin, the Tie-Town gang that we are.
For those of you who don't know, Thai Town is the area of Los Angeles that we live in. Nate, Devin, and I did this ET show together, or literally we're talking to each other over the internet, but we're 3 blocks away from each other.
And we have a gang as well. Yeah,
it's true. Obviously, I mean,
but and then as I was realizing when we were watching it, is just sort of talking about our childhoods, essentially.
It's pretty cool stuff. Jim, what about you? Any thoughts, memories, favorite moments? You've been on the most shows outside of me, J Money, and Davey. You've been on the 4th most shows.
Well, hey. I mean,
your shows don't get the most views though. George has you way beat as far as that's concerned.
It's George. I can't. I know I can't compete with George. I think mostly it's very humbling. Like I come and I learn, and that's always nice. And I think the first one I was on, you were talking about 66, about movies of 66, and you sort of looked at me and you were like, you have to watch The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming. That's your homework for the next time you're on.
Was like that stern about it? I thought I usually asked nicely.
No. You were kind of mean to me, but I mean that's fine. That's fine. I'm used to that.
And he likes it, Jay, ladies and gentlemen. That's what he likes. Once you meet his wife, you'd understand.
I never thought there was a movie that was a waste of my time in watching. Hair might have been the worst movie that I've seen in a while. It wasn't without merit or interest.
Foreman.
But there were still interesting things about it.
And knowing the musical as well as you do, that was a good perspective to have when we did that show. My favorite show with you, I think, might be, aside from the 1942 interview, but I mean, I think our discussion on Rust and Bone, which you and Davey hated, the discussion I thought was really intense and fascinating. Maybe not as fun. Like there was less jokes, I think, because you guys hated the movie so much. But I mean, like I thought the discussion, we really, really like had it out in a good way.
Even Rust and Bone, which I had problems with, I thought it was an interesting movie. I think my problems with it as a movie were I wanted it to be more than it was. I saw places where I thought it could be better, and I wanted more from it. I don't even know if I disliked it as much as I disliked it on the show, because I've thought about it a lot since. It was still worth my time to watch that movie. I never felt that it was a waste or that I should turn this off.
Cool. The second run, our next segment, our second run, where a show that one of us hadn't seen in the discussion, somebody goes off and they watch it and they come back and they tell us about it. And so this is going to be another chance for Jim to do a second run. The last one he did was a film called The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, that he also alluded to not too long ago. And he's back with us tonight. And Jim, do you want to tell us what 1942 film you're going to talk to us about tonight?
I am going to talk to you about King's Row.
King's Row. I'm prepared for this. King's Row! It works out. We're in sync. So there you go. King's Row from 1942, directed by Sam Wood, was nominated for Best Picture, and he was nominated for Best Director for the film. It's based on a book, if you can't tell from the poster. George and I had both seen it for the 1942 in review. It came up several times, and Jim was frustrated that he couldn't talk to us about it. But so now, Jim, here's your chance. What do you think King's Row upon watching it for the first time?
There's a couple things. One, and this is not the fault of the movie, but that soundtrack, the score was inspired by Lucas. Lucas wanted to use it for, it told John Williams to refer to it for Star Wars.
It inspired Lucas is what you mean to say.
Yes, the score inspired Lucas, and he gave specific notes to John Williams to refer to it.
There's a fun little foreshadowing because, ladies and gentlemen, I've got my top 5 movie scores coming at the end of the evening.
As a result, watching the movie, it seems the music that I hear seems to push me towards some fantastic element that I keep waiting to show up. And that is not the fault of the movie at all. That is simply this meta context.
Fair enough, but Jim, I'm unclear. Did you like the movie?
I did like the movie. I think that it is 4 separate movies that are like piled in one on top of the other. Sadistic killer storyline that pops up once every so often. You have Ronald Reagan actually being a good actor.
Everyone says this is his greatest performance of all time. I've got some thoughts on that when you're done.
And I totally agree. I thought he was great.
He did not receive an Oscar nomination, which was controversial at the time.
He should have gotten one.
Are you sure about that? Do you remember the other nominees? You don't. You didn't even see Johnny Eager. Would you say Ronald Reagan should have gotten one over one of those 49th Parallel guys?
I really like the 49th Parallel. The 49th Parallel is a better movie.
No.
And this one, it's sort of this changeover. You see this sort of formalist, melodramatic acting being pushed up against some actors coming in with a more natural take on the characters. And there's some really weird scenes as a result. Like Cassie, older Cassie, is straight melodrama. They like told her, no, you have to be crazier.
Whitfield has a hard time getting underneath the mental illness.
Yeah. Then Ronald Reagan is great. I can't remember the actress's name.
I hope you're going to talk about Ann Sheridan, because both George and I had her as should have been nominated for Best Supporting Actress of 1942. She was the one that Ronald Reagan ended up with.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, her. The tomboy. That's
yeah. Who turns out pretty hot.
He was great too. The whole psychiatry, that in itself is a movie. Let's explore the roots of psychiatry in America. That's its own movie that should be made.
Right. And do you remember, this was one of the films that we talked about as that we wanted to recast. So it's come up several times in the show. What I pitched in my recasting and my wanting to remake it is I actually wanted to make it into a TV drama, like a serial.
And I could see that. I think it would lend itself really well to it. I liked how I didn't know where the movie was going to go in the beginning. They spend so much time with the kids. It got to a point where I almost wondered if the movie was going to follow the children. At what point were we going to see Ronald Reagan and everybody else?
If not 50%, 40% of the film is the kids, right? I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a good 25, 30 minutes of the kids and setting that up. I thought it was a beautiful transition with him going up the steps and coming down the steps 8 years later.
Yeah, fair enough. I'll give Sam Wood that. I don't give him a lot, but I'll give him that.
It hit some melodramatic notes. It was a bit of a mess narratively, but at the end, I was sitting here yelling at the computer going, Paris, you can't do that. That's unethical. You have to tell him. You can't just send her to the asylum.
You were engaged, it sounds like.
Absolutely engaged, invested in the characters. Even though I know that it's a mess, it had me pulling for these characters to make good choices and to do the right thing.
What you're saying is very in line with how I feel about it. I found the stories, the characters, and the town very compelling, which is why I wanted to remake it. I think it really captures the struggles between the haves and the have-nots. It even dabbles a little in issues related to mental illness. Screenplay-wise, I feel like it's very thorough on the page. The performances are mostly fine, but not superb. They're kind of scattered. The standouts, I think, are Ann Sheridan that we talked about and Claude Rains. And I think he was one of the ones you were referring to as among the more subtle actors. And I think I had Jeff Daniels. We had an argument about this. I cast Jeff Daniels in this role, and you hadn't seen the film yet. You didn't think he was austere enough or something.
Yeah, having seen the film, I can kind of see him in that role now. But
I would have paid money to hear you say that 3 months ago, whenever that was. Anyway, you got really feisty about it. I'm like, what are you talking about? You haven't seen the film. Shut up. I do think it's Ronald Reagan's probably his best work. He's good in Desperate Journey 2, also from 1942, but this is his juiciest character. I don't think, having seen as many films from 1942 as I have, I don't think it's Oscar worthy. Robert Cummings as Paris is never particularly good in any movie, but he's not a huge drawback here. He's just enough. Charles Coburn, I think, is really over the top as the guy who does the amputations, the father, that's the other doctor, the bad doctor. My biggest issue with the film is the direction. Sam Wood, who I'm always harping as one of the worst directors in cinema history. Imagine if this meaty material would have been handled by any other director, what an amazing film it could have been. As we talked about in our review of Pride of the Yankees in episode 50.3, also directed by Sam Wood, he does not understand the words, depth, or nuance. He's never heard of them. He directs this movie as if he were banging the book against his head, hoping the themes would somehow seep into his head and he wouldn't have to read it. His blocking and his shot choices are so awkward and blunt, it's excruciating. He doesn't trust an audience any more than he can throw them, which I guess isn't that far, and the result is massive frustration. Jim, how do you feel about that?
I agree with that.
Cool. Nate, I don't suppose there's any chance in hell that you've seen King's Row from 1942.
It's about a bunch of kings that are all next to each other, right?
And they never leave. It's like Buñuel in that wins. They can't leave the row. They have to stay in
like, I feel like 227 was based on it, right?
I wanted to comment on what you said about mental health issues, because I thought that was incredibly modern. When they have the conversation of, if you see a person who's broken their leg and you see that's a physical illness and it wasn't their fault, it just happened to them, they need to rest. Well, I think about that way about people who have an illness of the mind. And I thought that was incredibly recent.
And that was the script too. Like those are moments that the script is really compelling, but I also feel like Sam Wood just sort of he didn't he sort of banged our head with it. You know what I mean? He didn't let it play in any natural kind of way.
Yes.
Jimmy, you feel good about that? That's the second run. Any more you want to say about King's Row? We covered it.
Yeah, the only other thing that I'd say, you don't see a flaw in Paris until he has that ethical dilemma towards the end. And he really is sort of this, I make the right choices. I am the good boy. Also, I'm genius. Also, I'm talented at everything I do.
I blame that on Robert Cummings a little bit. I feel like, he needed to flesh out that character a little more. He needed to give him some edge.
I don't know if it's there in the script. What made Ronald Reagan's character so interesting is the fact that you saw that his flaws, you saw that what he was working against and trying to become better than.
He's not the greatest actor, but he's always going to be much more compelling to watch than Robert Cummings.
Yeah.
Cool. You ready to move on?
I'm good.
All right. That's King's Row, our second run. Moving right along, I'm going to keep going with the theme of looking back at some of these years we've looked at, 1942, 1966, and 1990, in our obscure movie discovery. And that's when some of the films that we didn't get to while we were looking at those films, they come late from Netflix, and they're sort of among the more obscure films from those years. I finally watched them and tell you guys about them. And this is where one of these guys gets to choose a number. And whatever they pick, because I've seen several of these, and I've got 1990, 1966, and 1942 represented here for the last obscure movie discovery. So Nate, since you didn't participate in any of these, I'm going to let you choose a number. You and Bert choose a number.
Bert wants to choose 1.
Bert wants to choose 1. Can you read the number?
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to flip it. Air America from 1990, a film starring Mel Gibson and Robert Downey Jr. And let me see if I got it here. There it is. It's first one up because you chose number 1, so that worked out for me. So very cool. All right, so this is probably the best out of the films behind the cards here. I won't tell you what the other ones were, but the best of the 3 films I was going to discuss tonight, but hardly without significant flaws. The premise is about a true company called Air America, which employed pilots to supply guns and secretly opium to South Vietnamese and Laotian soldiers during the conflict in Southeast Asia in the late 60s. The aforementioned Mel Gibson and Robert Downey Jr. are 2 of those pilots. And that's to draw to the movie, isn't it? 2 of Hollywood's bad boys let loose in Laos. But that's not really what interested me about the movie. It was the story and plot that held the most interest. The moral dilemma of the devil's bargain the U.S. was making in getting involved in the opium trade in order to pacify its allies and fund a war. Even still, this concept could have been explored even further. The screenplay feels too plot-driven. I don't feel like any of the characters really have any arc whatsoever. They have a switch in some cases, which feels a little too sudden for my taste. The character dilemmas aren't really that much of a dilemma. The answers seem obvious in many cases. Mel Gibson's character, Gene, never feels like the mercenary he's painted out to be, and that's more of an issue with the screenplay than it is with the performance. The screenplay just told us that instead of showing us. Mel Gibson's fine performance-wise, charming as usual. He's believable as a pilot and as a leader, but not as the mercenary. But again, the screenplay didn't afford him that opportunity. The rest of the ensemble of pilots are pretty great in creating lived-in characters, except for Robert Downey Jr. As a young actor, he actually has quite a few affectations, a common mistake young actors make. He has the need to add little things arbitrarily to fill silences, whether that be facial tics, extra expressions that don't feel real. He doesn't do this anymore, but it was interesting to see him learning his craft still. It's not a bad performance, but I'd call it a flawed performance. And the last thing I want to talk about as far as Air America is concerned is the direction by Roger Spottiswoode. It's also pretty flawed. I would even say anachronistic in places. In spite of the occasional diegetic song, the movie never actually feels like it takes place in 1969. The hair, the outfits, the vernacular, all felt a little modern to me. The non-diegetic score makes it even worse. The shots were pretty straightforward, not really inspired or interesting in spite of the involvement of the great cinematographer, Roger Deakins. In terms of action, the director does a poor job of keeping us aware of off-screen space so that the action feels underwhelming and confusing most of the time. Overall, I'd say it's not a great movie, but not bad by any stretch. I would say maybe average to above average. Start with Nate. Nate, I don't suppose you've seen or heard of Air America.
No, I haven't seen it.
Have you heard of Air America? It's in our lifetime, at least.
It sounds familiar, but I haven't seen it.
Either the plot or the review, did I make you curious at all?
It did a little bit. It reminded me of a movie that I saw recently that I was trying to remember what it's called, but it's like about a pilot that I also think was based on a true story, where he was like a regional pilot that then got convinced to start taking drugs and stuff to Colombia.
American Made with Tom Cruise.
Yes.
Yeah, I named it that the best editing of 2017, actually. Andrew Monshine, I believe the editor was. Jim, have you heard of or seen Air America?
So let me tell you, you said that it did poorly at the box office. Well, my dollars contributed to that box office total.
Oh, wow. You saw it in the theater in 1990.
I did.
Wow. When you were like 34 years old then.
I was. And I can tell you the two things I remember about that movie. One was that it was about the Air America program, and two was that Mel Gibson had gotten his toe shot off and kept it on a chain around his neck. That was right?
That's gross.
That's correct. I didn't feel like it was important to mention, but
that's what has stuck with me.
So you're saying you don't remember the movie being good?
I didn't think it was bad. It was always in the shadow of Good Morning Vietnam. They're irreverent, there's funny, there's also drama, but one movie sticks out a lot more than the other for obvious reasons. It was nothing memorable, which from your review is pretty much what it sounds like.
Yeah, I guess that's about right. I wanted it to be good, though. I really did.
Yeah.
All right, guys, it's time for the final segment of the evening, and it's going to be my top five. It has the potential to be very, very controversial. JW here is making recommendations to me all day and waiting to see what I was going to say. And this top five is based on our discussion of E.T. Now, my first rule of the top five for tonight is I am not going to repeat any composers. So bear that in mind, Jim, when you're saying, oh, you should have talked about this score. What about that score? Obviously, there's a couple of composers that I can think of that if I didn't do this, they could dominate the top five. I have another disclaimer saying that I obviously can talk about many aspects of the movies and movie making, but I'm not as musical. I love music and I love movie music in particular, but I can't talk as intelligently about contrapuntal melodies or instrumentation. And maybe Nate will help me out with that because he is a musician as well as being a super talented actor and writer. And Jim, of course, is an average talented actor and writer. Anyway, obviously, this one is going to be really subjective. I know these guys in particular, and my guest here is going to have their own favorites. It's very subjective. So many answers to this question of the top five movie scores of all time, but these are my favorites. And the top four were very obvious to me. The top four are like, yeah, these are my four favorites. Fifth one I went back and forth on, and I had a lot of different thoughts, including I was toying with the idea of Now Voyager, actually, by Max Steiner. But let's start with my number five here, and let's see what it is. It's actually it's come up in a top five before. It was number one in our very first sound off. Top five movies set in Philadelphia. Ladies and gentlemen, my number five is Rocky, number five favorite score of all time. So much of the music from the original Rocky from composer Bill Conti feels very 70s, but it also feels really effective to me. Most people know the song Gonna Fly Now, which is mostly instrumental, but has some vocal stuff going on. But even the victorious main theme and the sweet jazzy love theme resonate with me. It captures the spirit of film and inspires the audience. The score is so integral to the storytelling success of the motion picture. Still good workout music. Rocky is my number five of all time. Jim?
I totally get that choice. Iconic.
JW grimaced and flipped me the bird. I know how he feels, even though he's from Philadelphia. Nate, any thoughts on Rocky?
It's fascinating because I knew it was Bill Conti, but I think I only realized that recently. For years, you would just see Bill Conti. He used to be the conductor for the Oscars often, and I just thought he was a famous conductor. I think the only thing that I'm unsure of is the datedness with that 70s quality of it. However, I will say the pump up, that sort of cadence, the trumpets, it gives me chills still, it's if you hear that, you're like, whoa, it's go time,
Yeah. And it works independently of the movie too, I think.
It totally does. Yeah.
Just to be clear, these are top five overall scores. And one of the things I like about the score is how different it works within the world, but how different the love theme is from the trumpet theme. You know what I mean? The score manages different emotions, and you'll notice that trend throughout this list. But if we were doing individual cues or individual tracks, Rocky IV has a great one with its 10-minute cue called War, which features the whole fight between the Russian and Rocky. That's a particularly great cue. I used to love that track. But this isn't about individual tracks. It's about the score in total. All right, guys, it's time for my number four. This movie's come up on the show before. Believe it or not, guys, there are audience members out there that keep track of every time I mention one of my all-time favorites and what number it is on my list of top 100. And this is my number five film coming up. That's your first clue. And we reviewed it on the show before in episode 6. So an early classic movie that we discussed. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's see what it is. And the big reveal, Dr. Zhivago, ladies and gentlemen. My number five movie of all time, and it's my fourth favorite score. Most famous for the enchanting Laura's theme, also known as Somewhere My Love. But the whole score is as powerful as the film. Maurice Jarre is the composer, and he weaves the balalaika and traditional Russian motifs into most cues, and the result is outstanding. It captures the rage of the revolutionaries and the longing of the star-crossed lovers. For many sequences of the film, director David Lean lets the music do most of the storytelling for him. It's kind of magical. Dr. Zhivago is almost a spiritual experience for me, and the score is a big reason why. This one might be more controversial because most people prefer Maurice Jarre's score to Lawrence of Arabia, but I'm Dr. Z all the way. Jim is pointing. I missed it on camera, but you can point again if you want. But you're pointing because you prefer Lawrence of Arabia.
I can see why you went back and forth on this one. I do prefer Lawrence of Arabia as an overall score.
It's a great score, but I mean, like for me, I love the film more than Dr. Zhivago, and I mean, maybe Nate will speak to this, but it seems more musically complex, like weaving in the Russian instruments and the feeling of early 20th century Russia. He has tracks that are more for the revolutionaries. He has tracks more for the lovers. He has tracks for the counter-revolutionaries. So much going on, and it's so different. Whereas Lawrence of Arabia feels more on the same plane to me. It's a great score. I'm not trying to knock it. And most people consider Lawrence of Arabia one of the top 3 scores of all time. So I'm just not in that group. I prefer Zhivago. Nate.
Well, I have embarrassing disclosure, which is I've never seen Dr. Zhivago. But I was thinking that I want to see it because I've been watching The Americans, and they reference it a lot.
Do they?
They do, because they sort of talk about like that's like the love story of picturing like Moscow in winter. This
book was banned in Russia by communist Russia for a long time.
Oh, really? Interesting. But I do know the music, and I would agree with you because I think like if you were coming up with tenets for judging criteria, that setting tone and almost being like a character in the movie is important. Not that that's not true in Lawrence of Arabia, but I do think I agree. Like it sets this local color kind of aspect to it. It's recognizable. Yeah.
Jim, do you have a counter punch to that?
No.
Great. Makes it easier for me. All right. JW earlier today said this score better be on the list. And it's not the score that he wanted me, but it's the same composer. It was difficult to decide actually which score from this composer to choose because he might have 2 in the top 5, and I didn't make that rule about the composer, only using one score per composer on this list. So I went with the potentially less complex but more emotional work in Once Upon a Time in the West. The Good, Bad, and the Ugly was the other one I was thinking of, and it might have the better singular cue. The Race for the Gold cue is one of my all-time favorite actual tracks. But the better overall score for my money is in this film. Director Sergio Leone and composer Ennio Morricone are very simpatico in how they collaborate in their films. Music is such a huge part of the film that Leone trusts Ennio's harmonica cues to basically be one of the characters. He named one of the characters Harmonica. Couple the mysterious harmonica work with the stirring cues surrounding Jill fulfilling her husband's dream of territorial expansion, most notably the cue known as Jill's America. Morricone's mix of opera and essentially sound effects makes his score singularly unique and tremendously fun. This score has all the fun stuff that the Man with No Name trilogy scores do, but also has that emotional, heartfelt stuff that stands out amongst his other scores, and that's why this one makes the list for me. I think there's more to it. It's more rounded. Nate, have you seen Once Upon a Time in the West?
Did they make a remake of it?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Nobody
I
remakes.
I have seen it. I was like the name, like I knew the original thing, but I thought like there's been a recent title that's like something similar.
The Once Upon a Time thing is used a lot, and Tarantino is doing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood now.
Oh yeah, but I mean in the West, like there was something similar. I forget, but
there's also How the West Was Won. I mean, there's Once Upon a Time in America, also by Leone.
I have not seen it, but I've seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and I think I know both of the music. It's tough because it is like. Maybe you're right, but because on some level, like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, like that little hit, it's almost cliche now.
You know what?
Yeah, but it's good.
That little hit that you talk about started in Fistful of Dollars, so that's not even unique, or it was done first in Good, Bad,
it's a callback. Okay, a little leitmotif.
It's a trilogy.
So much like Williams would do, yeah.
Yeah, Good, Bad, and the Ugly was the third in the trilogy.
Okay.
But Jim, I know you've seen all these films.
I have. Once Upon a Time in the West is one of my favorite movies.
Mine too. It's top 50 for sure. Probably even top 30, maybe 35. What do you think about the scores?
I think you're right to take this over Good, Bad, and the Ugly, over any of the trilogies. It's a good choice.
That's all he's got. I expected more. JW was so mad, he stormed out of the room. He wanted Good, Bad, and the Ugly on here.
No, Good, Bad, and the Ugly might be more memorable. This is the better score.
I think the film is more memorable too, but this film has so much more depth. I mean, Good, Bad, and Ugly is super fun. Good, Bad, and Ugly is top 50 all time as well. Maybe top 55. I should check these things. I'm going to move on to number 2, guys. You ready?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure you guys have seen this one. I might have even taken Nate to see it at a cemetery at some point. We reviewed this film in episode 14.3.
Okay.
And it was named the greatest movie of all time in 2012 by Sight and Sound. Strangely enough, this composer also did the score for what that same poll called the second greatest movie of all time. So he chose some good movies. And I've got Vertigo. Bernard Herrmann's score for Vertigo is simultaneously one of the most beautiful and painful music I've ever heard. From the dissonance of the title theme that matches the affliction mentioned in the title to the haunting love theme, the score runs the gamut of emotion. The complexity of the love theme alone captures the desperate passion and the extreme unbalance of James Stewart's Scotty character all at once. It puts my heart in a vice every time and won't let go of me, even when I'm not necessarily watching the film. Nate, I'll give you a chance again because I think you've seen this.
I've certainly seen it, but I can't remember the score.
It's luscious. You should listen to it. Listen to the love theme. Oh my God. It just kills me.
I probably need to rewatch Vertigo because I will say that I probably first watched it when I was a teenager, and at the time I didn't like, a lot of people would make fun of Jimmy Stewart and his voice, and I think I bought into that cynicism, and as an adult I've grown to appreciate, especially the younger you see him.
I loved him when we did the Washington one. What was it? Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But then later his voice becomes more caricature-y.
I mean, if you look at a lot of the 30s and 40s actors, because sound was new, having a unique vocal quality was actually, one of the things, especially an imitatable vocal quality, that's what made the stars. Like Bogey.
Right, yeah.
That was a big thing because with the advent of sound, unique sounds were marketable. So having that unique speaking voice went a long way, at least for the men. Jim, you looked like you were chomping at the bit waiting to talk.
When you announced the category, I immediately started thinking of films. So when you came up with Maurice Jarre and Dr. Zhivago, I was already thinking of Lawrence of Arabia. That makes sense. Rocky makes sense just because that theme is that movie. It is the spirit of that movie. Hitchcock movies didn't even cross my mind. Again, Psycho is probably the one that, as far as themes go.
We're talking about overall scores. Psycho has that great piece of music, that cue, that track, but overall scores, I turn to Vertigo.
And yes, when you say it, okay, I see that. I don't know if I would put it as my number 2, but I like the score.
It affects me. 1 and 2 on this list, really get at my soul.
I think that's the subjectivity of it, because you're going to find those movies where
Well, and also, I have more tendency to have obsessive qualities. So I think maybe that's why the score means so much more to me. That's all. He's got nothing to say to that.
Look, I understand. James Horner, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, gets me here.
Oh, wow. Not one that I expected. Okay, you guys ready for number 1?
Yes.
All right, this is one that GW very specifically told me not to use. But those of you probably saw this coming because we need to have something from probably the most prolific and important composer of our generation. And so many John Williams scores could have made this list, but this is the one that always lifts my heart and my soul whenever I hear it. And obviously, it inspired the whole countdown to begin with. E.T. is my favorite score of all time. From the childlike joy of new experiences in the track Flying to the epic 12-minute cue that covers the end of the film, the score covers a great range of emotions and pushes the film to new emotional heights. That final track in particular is so emotional for me. I could turn on the film at that point without any context and still be transported to that place and time, feeling all the bittersweetness of the moments between Elliot and E.T. Nate talked about how the film is about growing up in our last episode, and so the score reflects that with its sense of victory at the very end, its sense of accomplishment. I have gone on this journey and I've come out the other side. It's a small journey potentially, but the music makes it an epic achievement. As I said in the last episode, the music has me in tears every single time. without fail. Nate, you were on that show, so you can disagree.
Well, E.T. certainly brings me to tears. But it's interesting. If I were to go Williamson, he has to be on the list. I might pick something else, whether it be Raiders or Star Wars, because just thinking about it, I was like, I don't know if you remember, like when you're kids, as we approach Halloween, there was this composer Saint-Saëns, and he had this thing about like the zoo. Did you guys remember this?
Yeah, absolutely.
And each of the animals would be like a different instrument, and that's what I love about Star Wars. Everyone has their own kind of thing going on. As you pointed out, like a trilogy that like they'll do these callbacks. So when you see like little Anakin, then you get the tiny Darth Vader theme.
And obviously it's such a big part of our cultural consciousness. That music is woven into our culture at this point. I often said that the Star Wars series is almost like our modern day Iliad. It's this thing that we pass along from generation to generation. The music is a big part of that. I don't disagree with its importance. Musically, I am affected more. Like it's a more emotional to me, E.T.
Yeah.
So I'm affected more by it. So that's why I consider it so strong.
I agree with you that emotionally probably, but at the same time, the different sections, like I can hear maybe one or two sections in my head for E.T., but then like Star Wars is just like, it's a tour de force. There's so many different motifs that are in there that are separate and then come together. I think like just orchestrically, I didn't say that right. Orchestrally,
I was deciding whether or not I should catch you on
it. Yeah, Jim, what do you think?
Oh, look at Nate doing throws.
I think E.T., that score could have been a guy with a kazoo, and we would still have an incredible amount of emotional investment to that score because of how old we were when we saw this movie, characters in that film. And this is not to discount your love and passion of it. It's hard to speak objectively of particularly that movie, which was, I think, designed for children our age.
It still has an impact. And I feel like I saw it in the theaters, but I mean, like, I didn't really love it until I was much older, like until like the re-release.
I don't want to take anything away from what you did and of how you feel.
Thanks, Jim. That's very sensitive of you.
I'm trying. I mean, and this is not to take anything away from Williams. He's an amazing composer. I don't know if there's any objective sense from our generation on any scale of the big films that Williams scored. I think they are. It is a zeitgeist sort of cultural wrapped up thing that we all have this deeply emotional pull to so many of these films that clouds any objective judgment of them.
I tried to specify that in the beginning that it was completely subjective. Like these are just mine.
But maybe that's a sign of it being a great score that it's like it just is like you can't think of them separately. If you think of more modern things like Trent Reznor does or something like that. Yeah,
it's more atmospheric too. Like, isn't it a little more like just sort of setting a mood instead of really cueing emotions?
Yeah. They play the score at the Oscars like maybe you don't know, but then there's other ones where it's like, oh, boom, I know this.
I mean, I do think movie music in general, like it's the last 5-10 years, like there's nothing really. The last memorable score I feel is the one by, now my taste is also getting more and more towards the atmospheric. I appreciate the work done by Johnny Greenwood, for example, in things like Phantom Thread and so forth. I thought that was beautiful and not as much like on the beats and not as much dictating how we feel. Like I dig that. I'm into less is more, generally speaking. But in terms of scores that live in your consciousness, I mean, nothing really since Brokeback Mountain 2005. That's the last one that I remember really like resonated and having a melody that was repeatable and memorable and stuck with you and emotionally effective. Like I can't think of anything since then that really stuck with me, even though there's been a lot of good musical work, even stuff by John Williams. His score for Lincoln seemed okay, but it doesn't stick with me.
The Dark Knight.
Hans Zimmer's work never sticks with me.
Really? Okay, yeah. Part of me wants to blame Tarantino a little bit because we've moved towards the soundtrack.
I'm happy to blame Tarantino for just about everything. Well, but you can have both. Look at Forrest Gump, which I considered from my list that made JW angry. I love that score too, but Forrest Gump manages to have both a great soundtrack. Granted, it was found, but so Tarantino has existing music as well. Both a great soundtrack and a great score.
It's the rise of placeholder music that directors.
Steven Spielberg always uses temp music for John Williams movies.
one of the things that I read today concerning E.T. is that is true, except he came up with the 19-minute end, and it didn't time out right. Spielberg reshot it and recut it so that it would match it.
Yeah, AFI on TCM just the other night, they showed Spielberg and Williams talking about their collaboration, an hour-long thing that they shot at AFI, which is just up the block here. They told that very story. Thanks for bringing it up. So I'm going to give you guys the floor now because, I had my subjectivity here about my favorite scores, and it doesn't sound like you guys hate it that much, except maybe Jim is a little upset about Zhivago. Nate didn't see much of everything, but it sounds like he's agreeing with me a little more. In terms of your Star Wars thing, I will acknowledge that most people think Star Wars is the third greatest score of all time. They have Gone with the Wind, Lawrence of Arabia, and Star Wars is the three greatest, generally, like most, educated polls. I just love these other ones more. So, guys, can you think, you knew this top 5 is coming up, and it sounds like Jim did some thinking on it. Do you guys have some of your favorite scores?
I do. I have 3 in mind, and 2 will certainly be on people's list, and then the third would be, maybe I'm just a product of the time, but okay. So first one would be, of course, The Godfather. It's just iconic.
If I were going to go Nino Rota, I would probably go La Dolce Vita.
Oh, okay.
Godfather is iconic for sure. It's great. For me, it's Nino Rota's best work is La Dolce Vita. But go ahead.
And then The Untouchables.
So that was Morricone that did that. I already shot my Morricone load when I did Once Upon a Time in the West. I love the Untouchables score, but the reason I discounted it, it's derivative off the TV theme.
Is it really?
Yeah, that's the theme that they had on television. So that's why I discounted it. It's a great score, and Morricone does wonders with it, but the theme comes from the TV show.
And then my third one would be, I love the music from Glory. I think it's a beautiful score.
That's James Horner, I believe, isn't it?
James Horner. I was going to say, that was my pick.
You guys can share a pick. No one shared a pick with me, but I don't like James Horner either. If I were going to do James Horner, I'd do Field of Dreams, and that would probably be 11 or 12 for me.
Okay.
Glory's good, though.
You're wrong in this case. Glory is much better than Field of Dreams.
Ouch. Just wrong. All right, Jim, the floor is yours.
Well, I was going to say Glory, but...
That's all you got? You just had one? You of all people just had one?
I will give one Hans Zimmer movie credit. I will fight for this, and it's only because you said that you hate him so much.
Is it Days of Thunder?
No. Inception.
Inception's okay. But all-time great score? Ooh, I don't know about that. It's good. It's Oscar winning. All-time great score. I can't remember it. I remember it being one of his better scores.
Inception being based off the Edith Piaf song. He built the score around this very slow down tempo. I thought it was memorable. It certainly inspired numerous trailers after that. Generally was more memorable than most recent scores.
Okay.
I have one more, which I believe is Trevor Nunn. And
are you going to say Trevor Nunn's a theater director? Or are you going to say Trevor Jones and Last Mohicans?
Trevor Jones. Sorry, Trevor Jones. I'm going to say
Last Mohicans.
Yeah.
JW has been talking about that all day, and I said, get off my back. Trevor Jones stinks, except for his score for Arachnophobia. Last Mohicans is lovely. It's a lovely score. And another one like Dr. Zhivago, in fact, it used some old school regional instrumentation and influence to infuse that in its score. So, all right, guys, I'm going to close things out. Are you guys good?
So I will mention, I haven't been able to tell JB, but coming attractions, there will be a baby girl coming to this house. So that will be in March.
Holy cow. Talk about revelation. Anything from the 3-time father, Jim?
This is your first?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Sleep now. Store it up.
Nate, congratulations. I thank you for telling me. That's very great news. I'm so glad to hear it. Jim, you're the veteran of the most shows outside of the first 3 of us.
So we're having a baby too.
Jim, honestly, at this point, it woun't surprise me. Every 5 years, I give up on you guys, and then, holy cow, there's another baby.
It keeps things interesting.
Keeps money out of your pocket.
Oh, God, does it? I mean, I enjoy having these conversations. You know, I think that's the most interesting thing about this is being able to go in and I mentioned before, I always learn something on the during the course of the show, and that was always the most important thing for me, because it's great to have my own viewpoints and to be able to back them up, but to sit back and go, oh, I never thought of something in that way, or I never knew that existed. That was always the great pleasure that I took in being part of it. And I'm very thankful that I was invited back as many times as I was.
I don't want to speak for Davey, especially at this point, but I'm sure he would say the same thing. He was always very excited that every person I invited on, how intelligent and talented, insightful that you all were. So he was very pleased with everyone that I brought on. So, I'm sure he would thank you both, as do I, for your contributions over the last year. I certainly feel like you guys have helped make the show more diverse and more interesting. We do have 3 more shows, and it's our big ones, our finale episodes, which will be on Oscar week. And I can tell you the dates now. Our top 10 of 2018 is going to be on Tuesday, February 9th, and will feature me, James Monahan, and George. Jim knows George from the 1942 interview. He's going to do our top 10 with us this year. Our Oscar preview from 2018 is going to be on Wednesday, February 20th, and it will feature young Ryan and old Jim.
That is true, old Jim.
And our biggest show, of course, this year, instead of looking back 75 years, we're going to look back 30 years. That's going to be our 1988 review, and that will air on Thursday, February 21st, and that will feature Devin and Alex. So I'm going to spend the next few months working on that. To hopefully they'll be super awesome and ready for you when we debut them in February 2019. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.